Buckle up, everyone, because today we're diving headfirst into a day Wall Street will never forget.
February 3rd, 2025.
When President Trump, he really did. He slapped tariffs on imports from not just one,
Not two.
but three countries.
Canada
Mexico.
and China.
The markets went haywire, and we're here to untangle it all for you, like why it matters to your wallet and what this could mean down the road.
We've got... Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, we've got some really interesting sources for this deep dive. We've got stories from traders right there on the NYSE floor.
Expert economic analysis.
And we even get a peek into Trump's, negotiation tactics.
Let me throw this out there. The Dow
The Dow, yeah.
plunged over 600 points before, staging this crazy comeback. We're going to get to the bottom of that.
Yeah, that's going to be fascinating. So just how big are these tariffs?
They're massive.
Yeah.
We're talking 25% on goods from Canada and Mexico, 10% on energy, specifically from Canada, and then another 10% on goods from China.
And they're calling this a drug war. The White House is saying this is how we stop fentanyl and illegal immigration.
Right, but some people are saying, hold on, this drug war thing is just a cover for something else.
Like what?
Like protectionist policies. I mean, think about it. These tariffs are mainly on everyday goods, not directly fentanyl or, border crossings.
Okay, so that makes you wonder what's the real goal here, because Trump himself keeps talking about trade imbalances like he wants to even the score with these countries.
It's complicated, no doubt.
Yeah.
But let's look at what this might do to the economy. Tariffs, they always make imported goods more expensive, and businesses, they usually end up passing that cost on to us.
So our wallets are going to feel this.
Yeah, basically economists are predicting that groceries could go up 5%.
So that's like an extra $5 on every 100 you spend.
Exactly. It's not just groceries either.
Yeah.
We could see prices go up across the board. Plus, these tariffs could slow down the whole economy and even bump up interest rates on loans.
Wait, hold on. How would that affect me?
Well, when prices go up because of tariffs, the Federal Reserve often tries to control things by raising interest rates. And that means your monthly payments on things like your house, your car, even credit cards could go up.
Wow. Okay, so we've got these huge tariffs, this drug war narrative, and now it sounds like things could get extensive for all of us. And remember, those traders we mentioned on the NYSE floor, they saw this all go down firsthand.
Yeah, the initial reaction was panic, pure panic. The VIX, which is a measure of how scared the market is, it went through the roof. Investors were freaking out, selling off stocks, looking for somewhere safe to put their money.
Sounds like a wild ride.
It was a roller coaster.
And then, boom, out of nowhere, Trump says he's putting the Mexican tariffs on hold, and suddenly the market's like, oh, okay, maybe things aren't so bad.
That pause came after Trump talked directly with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. Mexico agreed to send 10,000 soldiers to the border, and in return, Trump hit pause on the tariffs.
So Mexico gives in pretty quickly. Some people are worried they might have set a bad example for future negotiations. What if the U.S. just demands more next time?
Yeah, it's a good question. On the surface, it looks like Mexico caved under pressure.
Right.
But Mexico's got a lot of experience negotiating with the U.S. on trade and immigration. They know how this game works.
So maybe they're playing it smart, waiting to see if this whole drug war thing is just a bluff.
Possibly. But then you've got Canada. They're taking a much tougher stance. They're talking about retaliatory tariffs, which is basically saying we'll hit you back with tariffs of our own.
Is that a bad move on their part?
It's hard to say. Canada and the U.S. have always been close.
Yeah.
But they're also fiercely independent, and they'll protect what's theirs,
Yeah, it's like that saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Exactly.
Canada and Mexico, they're our biggest trading partners and our allies.
Yeah.
But they're reacting in totally different ways to this pressure from the White House.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, it shows you how complicated these relationships really are. You've got Canada feeling like the White House just doesn't get them. And then you've got this whole drug war thing with Trump saying, we got to stop fentanyl and illegal immigration.
It's like two different conversations are happening. One about drugs and security and the other about economics and trade. Do you think Trump's using these issues as leverage to get what he wants on a bigger scale?
It's definitely possible. Remember, Trump's known for doing things his own way when it comes to negotiating. He often uses issues that seem totally unrelated to get an advantage and get what he wants.
Like he's playing 4D chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
He's playing a high-stakes game, that's for sure. And it's not just Canada or Mexico he's up against. He's challenging the entire global trading system. Trump's trying to use tariffs to change the rules of international trade.
But economists are warning about the potential consequences: inflation, slower growth, maybe even an all-out trade war. What's the worst that could happen here?
If these tariffs keep going, they can cause a chain reaction, disrupting supply chains, making prices go up for consumers, ultimately hurting businesses and economies on both sides. It's a really delicate balance, and the stakes are unbelievably high.
It seems like Trump's betting that the short-term pain of tariffs will be worth it in the long run. Like maybe he thinks he can get better trade deals and tighter border security. Do you think that's a gamble worth taking?
That's the million-dollar question. The global economy is all connected in ways we can't even imagine what one country does. Can have ripple effects across the entire world. A trade war between the U.S. and China, for example, would throw global supply chains into chaos, disrupt financial markets, and it could even trigger a global recession.
So what does all this mean for our listeners? What should they be paying attention to as this situation unfolds?
First and foremost, stay informed. Keep an eye on how this develops because it could affect all of us, whether it's the price of our morning coffee or the interest rates on our loans. Knowledge is power, especially when things are uncertain.
It's like having a roadmap when you're in uncharted territory. It might not tell you exactly where you'll end up, but it can help you avoid getting lost along the way. Now, you mentioned earlier that U.S. manufacturing actually grew in January for the first time in over 2 years.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
It's interesting, isn't it? It kind of goes against the idea that these tariffs are going to wreck the U.S. economy.
Right.
Some analysts think it's a sign that the economy's strong, but others are saying it might just be a temporary blip before the tariffs really hit.
So is this a good sign or the calm before the storm?
Time will tell, but this unexpected growth in manufacturing definitely raises more questions about the long-term impact of these tariffs.
So we've got these tariffs that could potentially cause a lot of problems, but then we see this growth in manufacturing.
Right, it's a mixed bag.
It is. Well, let's go back to Canada and Mexico for a second.
Yeah.
Why is Mexico seemingly more willing to negotiate with the U.S. while Canada seems ready to dig in their heels?
Well, Mexico agreed to send 10,000 soldiers to the border to get that temporary pause on tariffs. On the surface, it looks like they're giving in to pressure from the Trump administration. But remember, Mexico has a long history of negotiating with the U.S. They understand the dynamics, and they might be playing for time.
Waiting to see if this drug war is all talk.
Exactly. Remember, these tariffs haven't actually gone into effect yet. They're supposed to start on Tuesday, so there's still time to negotiate and find some middle ground. Canada, on the other hand, is taking a different approach.
They're standing their ground, maybe betting on their historically strong relationship with the U.S.
And they might be figuring that Trump won't risk messing that up by actually imposing tariffs on such a close ally. It's a high-stakes gamble for both sides.
It feels like we're watching a game of economic chicken. Whoever backed down first loses. What does this mean for the future of global trade?
This could be a major turning point away from globalization and towards a new era of protectionism and economic nationalism for decades. The trend has been towards lowering trade barriers and increasing global cooperation, but now we're seeing more and more leaders who put their own country's interests above everything else.
It's like the pendulum is swinging back in the other direction.
Yeah.
What's causing this shift?
Globalization has had both good and bad effects. It's lifted millions out of poverty and created incredible wealth, but it's also created winners and losers. With some industries and communities feeling left behind, these feelings of economic anxiety and insecurity are fueling the rise of populism and protectionism.
So people are turning to leaders who promise to shield them from the downsides of globalization, even if it means turning inward and building walls instead of bridges.
Exactly, and that's the heart of the problem. Policies like tariffs might make people feel more secure in the short term, but they also risk setting off a trade war that could hurt everyone involved. It's a classic case of short-term gains versus long-term consequences.
So are these tariffs just a negotiating tactic, a desperate attempt to hold on to power, or a real effort to change the global economy? It's hard to know what to think.
It's probably a mix of all those things. Trump's a skilled negotiator, and he's definitely using tariffs to pressure other countries to give him what he wants. But there's also a sense that he's trying to rewrite the rules of the game to create a world where the U.S. calls the shots in global trade.
And that's a risky move, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The global economy is incredibly complex and fragile. Anything that disrupts it could have huge consequences. We're all connected economically. What happens in one country can affect the whole world.
So what can our listeners do? It feels like we have very little power to influence these global forces.
Don't underestimate the power of informed citizens. We can stay informed, engage in thoughtful discussions, and hold our leaders accountable. We can support businesses that operate ethically and sustainably, and we can make consumer choices that reflect our values.
So it's not just about watching the news and feeling helpless. It's about taking action in our own lives and communities.
Exactly. And remember, we're all in this together. The global economy isn't a zero-sum game. We need to find ways to cooperate and work together to create a system that benefits everyone.
This has been an incredibly insightful discussion. Thank you for breaking down this complex issue in such a clear and understandable way.
It's been my pleasure. It's important to have these conversations and to encourage critical thinking about the forces shaping our world.
You've given our listeners a lot to think about. As we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you would leave them with?
I think the most important thing to remember is the global economy isn't some abstract concept. It's a real, living, breathing system that affects every aspect of our lives, from the prices we pay at the grocery store to the interest rates on our loans. The decisions made by world leaders have a direct impact on our daily lives.
It's a powerful reminder that we're not just passive observers in this global game. We have a role to play.
Absolutely. By staying informed, asking critical questions, and participating in these discussions, we can make informed choices and contribute to a more stable and equitable economic future.
So what are some specific things our listeners can do to stay informed and engaged?
Look for reliable sources of information, get your news from a variety of places, and be careful decider. Echo chambers. Don't just believe everything you hear or read. Think critically, question assumptions, and consider different viewpoints.
That's great advice. It's easy to get caught up in the hype and sensationalism of the news cycle, but it's more important than ever to be critical consumers of information.
Exactly. And remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand about what's happening in the global economy, the better equipped you'll be to navigate the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the immediate market reactions to the potential long-term consequences of these tariffs. Are there any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
The global economy is in a state of change. The old rules are being challenged and the future is uncertain. But that uncertainty also gives us a chance to rethink how we approach global trade and to create a more sustainable and equitable system for everyone.
It's a call to action not just for world leaders, but for each and every one of us.
Exactly. The future of the global economy isn't set in stone. It's being shaped right now by the choices we make both individually and collectively. So stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged because your voice matters.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into the complexities of global trade and the potential impact of these tariffs. We hope this is giving you, the listener, a better understanding of this evolving situation and the tools you need to navigate the challenges ahead.
And remember, this is a story that's still being written. Keep asking those critical questions, keep seeking out diverse perspectives, and stay tuned as the next chapter unfolds.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating exploration of the forces shaping our world.
Until then,
Stay curious out there, and I'll see you next time.
see you later.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really highlights how complicated things are. Like, Canada feels like they're being misunderstood by the White House.
Right.
And then you have this drug war narrative. Trump's really pushing this idea that we need to crack down on fentanyl and illegal immigration.
It's almost like there are two separate conversations happening, one about drugs and security and another about economics and trade. Do you think Trump might be using these issues as leverage to get something bigger?
It's definitely a possibility. I mean, Trump's famous for his unconventional approach to negotiating. He often brings up things that seem completely unrelated to gain an advantage and ultimately get what he wants.
So he's playing 4D chess while everyone else is stuck with checkers.
It's a high-stakes game, no doubt about it, and the opponent isn't just Canada or Mexico, it's the entire global trading system. Trump's basically challenging the established order using tariffs to try and reshape the rules of international trade.
But economists are sounding the alarm about the potential consequences, like inflation, slower economic growth, and even a full-blown trade war. What would be the worst-case scenario?
Well, if these tariffs aren't controlled, they can create a domino effect, disrupting supply chains, driving up prices for consumers, and ultimately hurting businesses and economies on both sides of the equation. It's a very delicate balancing act, and the stakes are incredibly high.
So it seems like Trump's taking a gamble. He's betting that the short-term pain of these tariffs will be outweighed by long-term gains in things like trade deals and border security. Do you think it's a gamble worth taking?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The global economy is so interconnected in ways we can't even fully grasp. What one country does can have ripple effects across the entire world.
Okay.
A trade war between the U.S. and China, for instance, could completely disrupt global supply chains, throw financial markets into chaos, and it could even trigger a global recession.
So what does all of this mean for our listeners? What should they be keeping an eye on as this situation unfolds?
The most important thing is to stay informed. Pay attention to how this develops, because it has the potential to impact all of us, whether it's the price of our morning coffee or the interest rates on our loans. Knowledge is power, especially in uncertain times.
It's like having a roadmap when you're navigating through unfamiliar territory. It may not tell you exactly where you'll end up, but it can help you avoid getting lost along the way.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier that U.S. manufacturing actually grew in January for the first time in over 2 years. What do you make of that?
It's a fascinating development, for sure. It seems to contradict the idea that these tariffs are going to have a devastating impact on the U.S. economy. Some analysts believe it's a sign of underlying economic resilience, while others caution that it could be a temporary blip before the full effects of the tariffs are felt.
So is this a sign that things are going to be all right, or is it the calm before the storm?
Only time will tell, but this unexpected growth in manufacturing definitely raises more questions about the long-term implications of these tariffs.
Right, it's like a mixed bag. All right, so we've got these tariffs that could potentially create a lot of problems, but then we also see this growth in manufacturing. It's a bit of a puzzle. Let's circle back to Canada and Mexico for a moment. Why is Mexico seemingly more willing to negotiate with the U.S., while Canada seems prepared to stand their ground?
Well, Mexico agreed to deploy 10,000 soldiers to the border in exchange for a temporary pause on the tariffs. So on the surface, it appears that they're conceding to pressure from the Trump administration. But remember, Mexico has a long history of negotiating with the U.S. They understand the dynamics at play, and they might be strategically biding their time.
So waiting to see if this drug war is just a bluff.
Precisely. Keep in mind that these tariffs haven't actually taken effect yet. They're scheduled to begin on Tuesday, so there's still a window of opportunity for negotiation and compromise. Canada, on the other hand, is taking a different approach.
They're holding their ground. Maybe they're banking on their historically strong relationship with the U.S.
And they might be calculating that Trump won't risk jeopardizing that relationship by actually going through with tariffs on such a close ally. It's a high-stakes gamble for both sides.
It feels like we're watching a game of economic chicken. Whoever blinks first loses the tariffs. What could this mean for the future of global trade?
This situation has the potential to be a major turning point, moving away from globalization and toward a new era of protectionism and economic nationalism for decades. The trend has been to reduce trade barriers and foster global cooperation, but now we're seeing a resurgence of leaders who prioritize their own nation's interests above all else.
It's like the pendulum is swinging back in the other direction.
Yeah.
What do you think is driving this shift?
Globalization has had a mixed bag of results. It has lifted millions out of poverty and created tremendous wealth, but it's also created winners and losers. Some industries and communities have been left behind, feeling the negative effects more than the benefits. These feelings of economic anxiety and insecurity are fueling the rise of populism and protectionism around the world.
So people are gravitating towards leaders who promise to protect them from the downsides of globalization, even if it means becoming more insular and building walls instead of bridges.
Exactly, and that's the core dilemma here. Protectionist policies like tariffs might provide a sense of security in the short term, but they also carry the risk of triggering a trade war that could ultimately harm everyone involved. It's a classic case of weighing short-term gains against the potential for long-term consequences.
So are these tariffs just a negotiating ploy? A last-ditch effort to hold on to power? Or a genuine attempt to reshape the global economy?
It's hard to decipher what's really going on.
It's likely a combination of factors. Trump is a shrewd negotiator, and he's undoubtedly using tariffs as leverage to extract concessions from other countries. But there's also a sense that he's trying to rewrite the rules of the game to create a world where the U.S. dictates the terms of global trade.
And that's a dangerous game to play, wouldn't you say? Absolutely. The global economy is an intricate and fragile ecosystem. Any attempt to disrupt it could have far-reaching consequences. The interconnected nature of the global economy means that actions taken in one country can have ripple effects that spread throughout the world.
So what can our listeners do? It feels like we have very little influence over these global forces.
Don't underestimate the power of informed citizens. We can stay informed, engage in thoughtful discussions, and hold our leaders accountable. We can support businesses that operate ethically and sustainably, and we can make consumer choices that align with our values.
So it's not just about passively watching the news and feeling powerless. It's about actively taking steps in our own lives and communities to make a difference.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that we're all in this together. The global economy isn't a zero-sum game where one person's gain is another person's loss. We need to find ways to cooperate and collaborate to create a system that works for everyone.
This has been a truly insightful conversation. Thank you for breaking down such a complex issue in a way that's clear and understandable.
You're welcome. It's crucial to have these types of discussions and encourage critical thinking about the forces shaping our world.
You've given our listeners a lot to ponder as we wrap up this part of our deep dive. What's the one key takeaway you'd like to leave them with?
I think the most important thing is that the global economy, it's not just some abstract idea, it's a real system that affects everything in our lives.
It really hits home.
Yeah, from how much we pay for groceries to the interest rates on our loans, decisions made by leaders around the world have a real impact on us.
So it's a reminder that we're not just watching this global game from the sidelines, we're players too.
Exactly. By staying informed, asking tough questions, and talking about these issues, we can make smart choices and help build a more stable and fair economic future.
So how can our listeners stay informed and get involved?
Find sources you can trust, get your news from a variety of places, and watch out for echo chambers. Don't just take everything you hear at face value. Dig deeper, question what you're told, and try to see things from different angles.
That's great advice. It's easy to get swept up in the hype of the news cycle. But being critical thinkers about the information we're consuming is more important than ever.
Absolutely. And remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand about how the global economy works, the better prepared you'll be to handle the challenges and seize the opportunities that come your way.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the initial shockwaves in the market to the potential long-term consequences of these tariffs. Any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
The global economy is in a state of transition. The old rules are being questioned and the future is uncertain. But that uncertainty also presents an opportunity for us to rethink how we approach global trade and work toward a more sustainable and equitable system for everyone.
It's a call to action, not just for world leaders, but for all of us.
Exactly. The future of the global economy isn't predetermined. It's being shaped right now by the choices we make, both individually and collectively. So stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. Your voice matters.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into the complexities of global trade and the potential impact of these tariffs. We hope you, the listener, have gained a better understanding of this evolving situation and feel empowered to navigate the challenges ahead.
And remember, this story is still unfolding. Keep asking those critical questions. Keep seeking out diverse perspectives and stay tuned as the next chapter unfolds.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating exploration of the forces shaping our world.
Until next time.
Stay curious out there.
Absolutely.
See you then.
Take care.